Chapter 1. Breaking news open. Marc Márquez has broken his silence. After weeks of speculation, rumors, and carefully managed press statements, the 9-time world champion has finally revealed the full truth about his injury, and what he has shared changes everything we thought we knew about his condition. This is not just another setback. This is not just another recovery timeline. According to Marc himself, the doctors have told him something that no elite athlete ever wants to hear. If he returns too soon, he risks losing his career forever. Tonight, we break down exactly what Marc said, what the medical team discovered, and why Ducati's championship ambitions for 2026 may now hang in the balance. This is the story of a rider facing the hardest decision of his life, and the painful details he can no longer keep hidden. The revelation came without warning. No pre-scheduled press conference, no carefully coordinated media strategy. Just Marc, speaking directly to the camera, with the kind of raw honesty that cuts through the usual corporate messaging that dominates modern motorsport. Within minutes of the video being posted, it had been viewed hundreds of thousands of times. Social media exploded, with reactions ranging from shock to sympathy to anger at those who had pressured him to return early. This was not the Marc Márquez the world was used to seeing. This was a man confronting his own vulnerability in front of millions. The timing of this announcement is particularly significant. It comes during one of the most critical periods in the MotoGP calendar, when teams are finalizing their development plans for the upcoming season. It comes at a moment when Ducati's rivals are preparing to capitalize on any weakness within the Italian manufacturer's lineup. And it comes at a time when Marc himself should have been celebrating a successful first season with his new team, not facing the possibility of an extended absence that could derail everything he has worked toward. The weight of these circumstances was visible in every frame of his statement. Chapter 2. What just happened? Earlier today, Marc Márquez appeared in a video statement released through Ducati's official channels. The mood was somber. The usual fire in his eyes was replaced with something harder to watch: acceptance. Marc began by thanking the fans for their messages of support, but within seconds, his tone shifted. He explained that the injury to his right shoulder was far more complex than anyone had publicly acknowledged. The initial diagnosis of a coracoid fracture was correct, but what the medical team discovered during deeper imaging changed the entire recovery strategy. According to Marc, the ligament damage surrounding the fracture was worse than expected. Not just a partial tear, but multiple micro tears across the rotator cuff and labrum. These injuries, he explained, are the type that can end careers if ignored. Marc then delivered the line that sent shockwaves across social media. "The doctors told me I have no choice left. If I rush this, I lose everything." That statement alone has been replayed thousands of times across MotoGP forums, fan pages, and sports news outlets. Ducati quickly followed up with their own press release, confirming that Marc would remain off the bike indefinitely, with no firm return date for preseason testing. The team emphasized that they fully support his decision and will not pressure him to return until he is medically cleared at 100% capacity. The timeline Marc described was brutal: 4 weeks of complete immobilization, then 6 to 8 weeks of physical therapy focused solely on regaining range of motion. Only after that can strength training begin, and only after strength training can he even think about sitting on a motorcycle again. If everything goes perfectly, Marc estimated he might return to light riding by late January or early February. But he also made it clear there are no guarantees. This is not a standard recovery. This is a case where the medical team is prioritizing long-term career survival over short-term performance. Marc admitted that this approach is difficult for him to accept. He is a rider who has built his entire reputation on pushing through pain, on returning faster than expected, on defying medical advice. But this time, he said, the risk is too high. The words, "no choice left," were not an exaggeration. They were the reality of what his doctors told him face to face. What made the statement even more impactful was Marc's visible emotion. At several points during the video, he paused to collect himself. When discussing the moment, the doctor showed him the full extent of the damage on the imaging scans. His voice wavered. He described sitting in the medical office, looking at the screen, and realizing that everything he had convinced himself about the injury being minor was wrong. The doctors did not sugarcoat it. They told him that continuing to race in that condition was not brave, it was reckless. They told him that his shoulder was operating on borrowed time, and they told him that one more crash, one more high side, one more violent impact could result in damage so severe that no surgery could fix it. Marc admitted that hearing those words felt like a punch to the gut. For a rider who has spent his entire life believing he could overcome anything, Being told that he had reached a physical limit he could not ignore was devastating. The reaction from the MotoGP community was immediate and overwhelming. Fellow riders posted messages of support across social media. Valentino Rossi, despite their complicated history, publicly stated that Marc was making the right decision and that protecting his long-term health should always come first. Team principals from rival manufacturers expressed their respect for Marc's transparency, and fans, many of whom had been critical of his decision to continue racing through earlier rounds, now understood why he had been struggling. The narrative shifted from questioning his performance to admiring his courage and finally admitting the severity of his situation. This outpouring of support likely made Marc's decision easier to live with, knowing that the paddock understood and respected his choice. Chapter 3. How we got here. To understand how Marc Márquez arrived at this moment, we need to rewind the calendar to the beginning of 2025. His move to Ducati was the most significant rider transfer in recent MotoGP history. After years of struggling with an uncompetitive Honda, Marc finally had the machinery to challenge for victories again. The preseason hype was enormous. Ducati had signed one of the greatest riders in the sport's history, and expectations were sky high. When the season began in Qatar, Marc delivered immediately a podium finish in round 1, another podium in round 3. Then, in round 6 at Portimao, he reminded the world why he is considered one of the most dangerous riders on the grid. A flawless victory, clinical in execution, emotional in its significance. Marc had proven that with the right bike, he was still capable of dominating at the highest level. But the season was not without challenges. In round 9, a mechanical failure cost him a potential second victory. In round 12, a collision with another rider forced him into an early retirement. Despite these setbacks, Marc remained firmly in contention for the championship. He was fast, he was consistent, and most importantly, he was healthy. That changed in round 15 at the Indonesian Grand Prix. During the final practice session, Marc suffered a violent high-side crash exiting turn 7. The rear tire lost grip mid-corner, snapping the bike sideways and launching Marc several meters into the air before he slammed into the gravel cameras, captured the impact in brutal detail. Marc landed hard on his right side, his shoulder absorbing the majority of the force. He remained on the ground for several seconds before slowly getting to his feet. Medical staff rushed to his side, but Marc waved them off. He walked back to the paddock under his own power, clearly in pain but conscious and mobile. Initial reports suggested minor bruising. Marc himself downplayed the incident, insisting he would be ready for Sunday's race. And incredibly, Marc competed in the Indonesian Grand Prix, finishing in 7th position despite visible discomfort. After the race, he described the pain as manageable, something that could be treated with rest and physiotherapy. Ducati's medical team conducted preliminary scans, which showed no fractures at that time. Marc continued racing in round 16 and round 17, though his performances were noticeably subdued. Then, after the final race of the season, more detailed imaging was conducted. That is when the true extent of the damage became clear. The coracoid fracture, the ligament tears, the structural instability. What Marc had been racing with for 3 consecutive weekends was an injury that should have sidelined him immediately. Looking back, there were warning signs that everyone missed. In round 16, Marc's lap times were consistently slower than his earlier season pace. During post-race interviews, he appeared exhausted in a way that went beyond normal physical fatigue. His body language on the bike changed. The aggressive, committed style that defined his riding was replaced with a more cautious approach. Observers at the time attributed this to mental fatigue or strategic conservation of energy for the championship battle. But in hindsight, it was clear that Marc was compensating for an injury he could not fully control. Every braking zone required extra effort, every change of direction sent pain through his shoulder, and every lap was a test of how much discomfort he could endure before his body forced him to back off. The fact that he finished those races at all is a testament to his mental toughness, but it also highlights the danger of allowing riders to compete while injured. The crash itself has been analyzed extensively by biomechanics experts and former riders. Video footage shows that Marc's shoulder struck the ground at an angle that concentrated the impact force directly onto the coracoid process. The initial contact was followed by a rolling motion that twisted the shoulder joint, which likely caused the ligament damage. High-side crashes are particularly dangerous because the rider is thrown upward and forward, meaning they land with significant velocity and often cannot control their landing position. In Marc's case, he had no opportunity to protect himself. The crash happened so quickly that his body was airborne before his reflexes could react. This type of uncontrolled impact is exactly what safety equipment is designed to protect against. But even the best airbag systems cannot prevent all injuries when the forces involved are this extreme. Chapter 4. Deep breakdown of the core event. The coracoid process is a small, hook-shaped bone that projects from the shoulder blade. Its primary function is to serve as an attachment point for ligaments and tendons that stabilize the shoulder joint. When this bone fractures, the entire structural integrity of the shoulder is compromised. In Marc's case, the fracture occurred at the base of the coracoid, meaning the break was located in the most biomechanically critical area. But the fracture itself was only part of the problem. The imaging revealed extensive damage to the surrounding soft tissue. The coracoclavicular ligaments, which connect the coracoid to the collarbone, were partially torn. The labrum, a ring of cartilage that deepens the shoulder socket, showed signs of fraying. And most concerning of all, several tendons in the rotator cuff exhibited micro tears that had likely been developing over multiple races. For a MotoGP rider, this combination of injuries is catastrophic. During braking, a rider experiences deceleration forces exceeding 1.5 G. The arms must absorb and control these forces, with the shoulders acting as the primary anchor point. When Marc slams on the brakes from 330 km/h into a 90 km/h corner, his entire body weight shifts forward. His hands grip the handlebars with extreme force. His forearms tense, and his shoulders lock into place to stabilize the upper body. Without a fully functional coracoid and intact ligaments, this action becomes not just painful, but mechanically impossible. The shoulder cannot handle the load. The joint becomes unstable, and any attempt to push through the pain risks turning a fracture into a complete structural failure. Beyond the physical mechanics, there's also a neurological component. The shoulder is one of the most nerve-dense areas of the body. When ligaments tear, nerve endings become inflamed. This creates not just pain, but also a loss of proprioception, which is the body's ability to sense its position in space. For a rider like Marc, who relies on split-second reactions and millimeter-perfect control, losing proprioception in the shoulder is unacceptable. It affects his ability to feel the front tire's grip. It disrupts his braking confidence, and it introduces hesitation into a riding style that has always been defined by absolute commitment. The doctors explained all of this to Marc in clinical detail. They showed him the scans. They walked him through the worst-case scenarios, and they made it clear that racing in this condition was not an option. The medical team also explained the healing process in detail. Bone fractures heal through a process called ossification, where new bone tissue gradually fills the fracture site. For a small bone like the coracoid, this process typically takes 6 to 8 weeks under ideal conditions. However, Marc's fracture was complicated by the fact that he had continued racing after the injury occurred. Every lap he completed, every braking zone he attacked, every vibration transmitted through the handlebars disrupted the early stages of healing. Instead of allowing the bone to begin knitting together, he kept re-aggravating the injury. This delayed the healing process and increased the risk of the fracture becoming a non-union, which is a condition where the bone fragments never properly reconnect. If that happens, surgery becomes mandatory, and the recovery timeline extends by months. The ligament damage presents an even more complex challenge. Unlike bones, which have a rich blood supply that promotes healing, ligaments are relatively avascular, meaning they have limited blood flow. This makes them heal much slower than bone tissue. The micro tears in Marc's rotator cuff and labrum will require at least 12 weeks to achieve even partial healing. During that time, the shoulder must remain relatively immobile to prevent further tearing. But complete immobilization creates its own problems. Muscles atrophy when they are not used. Scar tissue forms in unpredictable patterns, and joint stiffness develops, which can limit range of motion even after the injury has healed. This is why the recovery protocol is so carefully structured. Too much rest leads to weakness. Too much activity leads to re-injury. The medical team must find the precise balance between protecting the injury and maintaining function. Sports medicine specialists who have reviewed Marc's case publicly have noted that this type of injury is particularly challenging for motorcycle racers. Unlike athletes in other sports who can modify their technique or reduce intensity during recovery, a MotoGP rider cannot partially commit. The sport demands 100% physical output on every lap. There is no such thing as racing at 80% capacity when you are battling for position at 300 km/h. This all-or-nothing nature of motorcycle racing means that Marc cannot return until his shoulder is fully healed. Any compromise in strength, stability, or pain tolerance could result in a crash that ends his career permanently. Chapter 5. Immediate Impact. The immediate consequences of Marc's injury are already reshaping Ducati's plans for the off-season. The Valencia post-season test, which was scheduled to take place just days after the final race, was supposed to be Marc's first opportunity to ride the 2026 prototype. This test is critical for bike development. Engineers use rider feedback to fine-tune aerodynamics, suspension settings, and electronics. Without Marc's input, Ducati must rely on data from their other riders. Nicolo Bulega, who was promoted to replace Marc for the final races, will now participate in the Valencia test. But Bulega is not Marc Márquez. He does not have the same riding style. He does not have the same reference points. And while his feedback will be valuable, it cannot replace the insights that one of the sport's most experienced riders would provide. Ducati's development timeline is now compressed. Normally, the team would have Marc's feedback from Valencia, followed by additional testing sessions in November and December. Those sessions would allow engineers to make iterative improvements based on rider input. Now, the first time Marc will ride the 2026 bike is likely to be in late January or early February, assuming his recovery stays on track. That gives Ducati significantly less time to make adjustments before the season begins in March. And if Marc's recovery takes longer than expected, the team may have to finalize the bike's development without his involvement entirely. This is a nightmare scenario for any factory team. The bike that Marc races in 2026 may be optimized for other riders, not for him. Meanwhile, Marc's rivals are gaining ground. Francesco Bagnaia and Jorge Martin, both of whom will participate in the full testing schedule, will enter the off-season with a clear advantage. They will have more time on the new bike, more data to analyze, more opportunities to refine their setup. And most importantly, they will have continuity. Marc, by contrast, will be starting from scratch. He will miss weeks of critical development work. He will have less physical conditioning, and he will carry the psychological weight of knowing that he is already behind before the season even begins. This is not the position Ducati wanted to be in, and it is certainly not the position Marc wanted to be in, but it is the reality they must now navigate. The financial implications cannot be ignored either. Ducati has invested millions in securing Marc's services. Sponsorship deals were signed based on the expectation that he would be competing at the front of the field. Marketing campaigns were planned around his presence on the bike, and merchandise sales were projected based on his star power. An extended absence puts all of that revenue at risk. Sponsors become nervous when their investment is sidelined. Fans lose interest when their favorite rider is not competing, and the team's overall commercial value decreases when one of their headline riders is unavailable. Ducati's management must now manage these business realities while publicly maintaining their support for Marc's recovery. It is a delicate balance that requires constant communication with sponsors, careful messaging to the media, and transparent discussions with Marc about the expectations and pressures he will face when he does return. The ripple effects extend beyond Ducati as well. Other teams are watching this situation closely, analyzing how it might affect the competitive balance for 2026. If Marc is absent or diminished when the season begins, it opens opportunities for riders who would otherwise be fighting for podium positions behind him. Teams that were planning their strategies around containing Marc's speed must now recalibrate. And young riders hoping to make their mark in MotoGP now have one fewer legend to measure themselves against, at least temporarily. The entire grid is affected when a rider of Marc's caliber is removed from competition, even if only for a few months. Chapter 6. Long-term impact and future. The long-term implications of this injury extend far beyond the 2026 season. Marc Márquez is 32 years old. In MotoGP terms, that is not old, but it is no longer young riders in their early 30s are expected to be at their physical peak, but they are also entering the phase of their careers where recovery takes longer and injuries accumulate. Marc's history with injuries is well documented. The arm injury he sustained in 2020 required multiple surgeries and cost him nearly 2 full seasons. The vision problems he experienced in 2021 forced him to miss races. And now, this shoulder injury adds another layer of complexity to his physical condition. The question is no longer whether Marc can return to racing. The question is whether he can return at the level required to compete for championships. Ducati's internal calculations are undoubtedly shifting. When they signed Marc, they expected a rider who could challenge for the title immediately. They expected someone who could provide world-class feedback and help develop their bike. And they expected a multi-year partnership that would yield multiple championships. Now, just one season into that partnership, they are facing uncertainty. If Marc's recovery goes poorly, Ducati may need to reconsider their long-term rider lineup. If Marc cannot return to his previous form, the team may need to pivot their development strategy. And if Marc's injuries continue to accumulate, they may need to start planning for life after Márquez. These are uncomfortable conversations, but they are conversations that every factory team must have when a star rider faces a serious injury. For Marc personally, this injury forces a level of introspection that he has likely avoided for years. He has always been the rider who pushes through pain, the rider who returns ahead of schedule, the rider who refuses to accept limitations. But now, he is being told that this approach is no longer viable. The doctors have made it clear, if he rushes this recovery, he risks permanent damage. If he ignores their advice, he could end his career. And if he tries to be the hero one more time, he may lose everything he has worked for. This is a turning point, not just for Marc's physical health, but for his entire mindset as a competitor. He must learn to accept patience. He must learn to trust the process. And he must learn that sometimes the bravest decision is not to fight, but to step back and heal. There's also the question of what happens after racing. Marc has given no indication that he is considering retirement, but every serious injury forces that conversation to the surface. At 32, with 9 world championships already secured, Marc has nothing left to prove to anyone. He could walk away tomorrow and his legacy would be secure as one of the greatest riders in MotoGP history. But Marc is not built that way. He races because he loves it, because he needs it, because the competition is what defines him. Retirement is not about whether he has achieved enough, it is about whether his body will allow him to continue competing at the level he demands of himself. This injury is a reminder that the decision may ultimately be made for him, not by him. The historical context is also worth considering. Many of MotoGP's greatest riders have faced career-defining injuries in their early 30s. Some, like Casey Stoner, chose to retire rather than continue racing with lingering physical issues. Others, like Valentino Rossi, adapted their riding style and extended their careers into their 40s. Marc now faces the same choice. Does he push through this injury and risk more damage? Does he modify his approach and accept that he may never again be the fearless rider who dominated the sport for so many years? Or does he make peace with what he has accomplished and walk away on his own terms? These questions have no easy answers, and Marc will have months of recovery time to contemplate them. Chapter 7. Expert Style Commentary. Behind the scenes, this situation reveals several layers of complexity that the public rarely sees. First, there is the medical reality. The type of injury Marc is dealing with is notoriously difficult to treat in athletes who rely on explosive upper body movement. Surgeons can repair fractures and reattach ligaments, but restoring full function is a different challenge entirely. Scar tissue forms during the healing process, which can limit range of motion muscles atrophy during periods of immobilization, which requires months of rebuilding. And nerve damage, if present, may never fully heal. Marc's doctors are not just treating a fracture. They are managing a complex recovery process that involves bone, soft tissue, nerves, and biomechanics. Every decision they make carries risk. If they clear him too early, he re-injures himself. If they hold him out too long, he loses competitive sharpness. The margin for error is razor thin. Second, there is the psychological dimension. Marc Márquez has built his entire identity around being unstoppable. He is the rider who won championships despite broken bones, the rider who returned from career-threatening injuries and still competed at the highest level, the rider who refused to accept that anything was impossible, but this injury is forcing him to confront a reality he has spent his entire career denying. He is human. He has limits, and those limits are now being enforced by people he cannot ignore. The psychological impact of this realization cannot be overstated. For a rider like Marc, sitting on the sidelines is not just frustrating, it is existentially threatening. His entire sense of self is tied to competition. Without racing, who is he? This is the question he must answer during his recovery. Third, there is the political angle within Ducati. The team has invested enormous resources into signing Marc. They have restructured their rider lineup to accommodate him. They have allocated budget, personnel, and development time around his presence. Now, that investment is on hold. Ducati's management must balance their public support for Marc with their private concerns about the future. They cannot afford to appear disloyal. but they also cannot afford to fall behind their rivals. This creates a delicate situation where every statement, every decision, and every timeline adjustment is scrutinized by the media, the fans, and the other riders. Ducati must navigate this with precision, ensuring that Marc feels supported while also protecting the team's competitive interests. There's also the broader context of how MotoGP handles rider injuries. The sport has made significant strides in safety over the past decade. Airbag systems are now mandatory. Medical facilities at circuits have improved dramatically, and concussion protocols have been implemented to protect riders from returning to competition too soon. But there is still a culture within the paddock that glorifies toughness and minimizes injury. Riders are expected to compete through pain teams, pressure their athletes to return as quickly as possible, and fans often criticize riders who take extended time off, questioning their commitment or mental strength. Marc's decision to prioritize long-term health over short-term performance challenges that culture directly. By being transparent about the severity of his injury and the medical advice he received, Marc is setting a new standard for how riders should approach recovery. This could have a ripple effect across the entire sport, encouraging other riders to take injuries more seriously and empowering them to resist pressure to return prematurely. The role of Ducati's medical team in this decision also deserves recognition. In many racing organizations, team doctors face conflicting pressures. They are employed by the team, which creates an inherent conflict of interest when deciding whether a rider is fit to compete. The team wants their rider on the bike, the sponsors want their investment visible, and the rider often wants to race, regardless of medical advice. But in Marc's case, it appears that Ducati's medical staff held firm. They presented the evidence. They explained the risks, and they made it clear that clearing him to race would be medically irresponsible. This suggests that Ducati has a medical culture that prioritizes athlete welfare over competitive results, which is exactly what the sport needs more of. Chapter 8. Strong Ending. Marc Márquez's career has been defined by moments of triumph over adversity. He has won championships with broken bones. He has returned from surgeries that would have ended lesser riders' careers. And he has proven time and time again that he is capable of achieving the impossible. But this moment is different. This is not a challenge he can overcome through sheer willpower. This is not an injury he can ignore. And this is not a situation where pushing harder will lead to victory. For the first time in his career, Marc Márquez must accept that the only way forward is to step back, to trust the doctor, to embrace patience, and to prioritize his long-term future over his short-term ambitions. The question that remains is whether this enforced pause will ultimately strengthen him, or whether it marks the beginning of the end for one of MotoGP's greatest careers. As Marc begins the long road to recovery, the entire paddock waits. Will he return in 2026 as the same relentless competitor who has dominated this sport for over a decade? Or has this injury changed him in ways that cannot be reversed? The answer will define the final chapter of his legendary career. The coming months will be critical. Every week of recovery will be monitored, every physical therapy session will be analyzed, and every decision about when to return to the bike will be scrutinized by millions of fans around the world. Marc has chosen the difficult path, the path that requires humility, discipline, and faith in a process he cannot control. But if there is one thing Marc Márquez has proven throughout his career, it is that he is capable of doing difficult things. The question is whether this particular challenge is one that even Marc Márquez can overcome. What we witnessed today was not weakness. It was strength. The strength to admit vulnerability, the strength to accept help, and the strength to make the hardest decision of his professional life. Marc Márquez has nothing left to prove to anyone. His 9 world championships speak for themselves, but he has everything to prove to himself, and that is what will drive him through the long months of rehabilitation ahead. When he finally does return to the grid, whether it is in February or March or even later, the entire MotoGP world will be watching, not just to see if he can still ride fast, but to see if he can still be Marc Márquez. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below.